This is December 12th, 1984. My name is Joe Todd, and this is an interview with Mr. Vincent B. Appleton in Buffalo, Oklahoma. Sir, where were you born?
Buffalo, Oklahoma.
And when's your birthday?
September the 7th, 1914. I'm living in the house in which I was born.
Who is your father?
J.W. Appleton, Weaver.
J.W. Appleton?
Yes.
And your mother?
Sadie Brawley.
What kind of work did your father do?
He was a farmer.
Farmer.
Yes.
Where was he born?
He was born in southeastern Kansas.
When did he come to Oklahoma?
1902.
Why?
He came, I suspect, to be a farmer.
Did he come here to stake out a claim, homestead? Or?
I think he filed on one that had been filed on earlier, or he bought out somebody's.
Oh, relinquishment?
Relinquishment.
Where was it?
Originally, it was southeast of town. He later traded that for a half section that joins the town on the south. Right south of the schoolhouse.
And your parents were married in what year?
1908.
1908.
Yes.
So your mother was here when they met?
Yes, she came a year before my father. She came in 1901. Behind the covered wagon and herded cattle from Washington County, Kansas.
Did your mother talk about the trip coming down, herding the cattle?
Oh, not a whole lot, other than she said they had to wash clothes in the buffalo wallows and give water out of the wallows to wash the clothes and take care of the basic necessities. It was a long trip. About 300 miles.
Hey, 1914.
1901.
Okay, okay. You were born in 1914.
Yes.
Okay. Did your father still have the farm at that time?
My father had the farm. I'm not sure what year. He bought that farm, I guess, in 1911, I believe it was. But he had a farm southwest of town before that.
As a small boy, what chores did you do in the farm?
Oh, it was usually my job to milk cows and gather the eggs, help feed the hogs. In season, work in the garden.
Did you know your grandparents?
I knew my grandmother only. My grandmother Brawley died when I was 7. I remember the first airplane I saw. I was up with my grandmother's, and I ran and got under her bed. Get away from that thing.
Were either one of your grandfathers in the Civil War?
I believe not.
Okay. What was your grandmother's name?
Sarah Swangen.
Do you remember World War I?
No. I was born in 1914, but I do not remember. The only thing I remember about the war was Mother took me to the schoolhouse one day, and they were marching up and down the aisles carrying the flag between the rows of seats. We had gone to the schoolhouse, I guess, to see my brother at school in some kind of a play or demonstration, maybe.
Do you remember Armistice Day?
No.
Okay. 1920s. Tell me about your school, where you started.
Well, the first year I went to the Catholic Church because they were building a new school building in Buffalo, and different grades went to different schools. Miss Hickenlooper was our teacher at the Catholic Church building.
What year was that?
1920.
What was your favorite subject?
I'm not sure. Probably recess.
Mm-hmm. And how far did you go through school?
I finished high school and went to Central State Teachers College a couple of years. Then I went to Oklahoma University to law school and graduated from there in '39. And then I went to the seminary in Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, and graduated from there in 1942.
Okay. What year from high school?
32.
1932. What was it? Describe being a high school student in the Depression.
Well, we hardly realized it. We had food on our table. We had milk cows and chickens and turkeys and pigs, and it was tough times, but we didn't realize how tough. The land was mortgaged. My brother went to college, and father mortgaged the place for what he could get it mortgaged for to help put my brother in school. I got ready to go to college. Why, there wasn't any money to be had, but he took me out the north side of town, and I held up my finger, and away I went with my suitcase off to college, hitchhiked back and forth, which was easy in those days, not quite so easy now.
So, you're 1932 graduate of Buffalo High School?
Yes.
Central State.
Edmond.
What was the campus like in
1932? Yes, the fall of 1932, the campus was quite colorful. I remember the following spring I was asked to write a theme, and I wrote about the dandelions growing on the campus, and there were numerous, but I made an A on that theme. About the only A I ever made writing.
How many students were at Edmond in 32?
Oh, approximately 1,200.
Now, isn't it the oldest?
I do not know that Old North Tower is the oldest building on the campus, I believe, and it probably still stands. I'm not sure about that.
Does.
But it may have been the first teachers' college, or it may have been the first building started. I do not know.
I think it's the oldest school for higher learning in Oklahoma.
Is that right?
It predates OU and OSU both.
Is that so?
Yeah, 'cause it was founded 1890.
I do not recall.
And OU and OSU are both in 91
92.
or 92. How long did you attend Central State?
2 years, and then I transferred to the university. Took a degree in law.
So you went to OU in 1934.
Yes.
What was your impression of OU?
It was a big university. 5,000 students. I stayed in the dormitory of 85 men. Waited tables and made beds. Punched a typewriter. I got 35 cents an hour from the school for doing work. I was the secretary to the executive secretary of the Oklahoma Municipal League. So between the 3 jobs and going to school, I managed to pay my bills.
Which dorm did you live in?
A fuller dorm, a dormitory of 85 men.
That's still standing?
No, it's been torn down.
Let me back up. Where did you stay in Edmond at Central State?
I stayed with my aunt and uncle. They had left Buffalo and moved to Edmond so that they could go to put their children in college. And I had a cousin who was my age, and we roomed together, and I went to school, carried papers, I walked 5 miles a day before breakfast and 5 miles a day after lunch, delivering papers, and got $3.75 a week. Turned my check over to my aunt and my uncle and managed to get board, room, and laundry for $12 a month.
It's not bad.
Not bad.
Who was head of the law school at OU?
Dean Monette.
He was there then.
Yes, sir.
What kind of person was he?
Oh, I suspect you would call Dean a man of the old school, a bald-headed, venerable person who knew a lot about human nature, and I guess a lot about the law. I'm not so sure. I didn't know enough about it to be a conversant.
Had they constructed the law barn at that time?
Yes, the law barn was quite an institution. The engineers each year would try and paint it green, and the lawyers usually reciprocate in the spring of the year at the engineering.
I attended OU also, and they came, but they just painted the owl green.
Yeah.
What started that rivalry?
I haven't the faintest idea. Long-standing rivalry between engineers and lawyers on the campus.
What do they do now with the new law center?
I wouldn't know. I've never seen it.
Very nice. There's no owl paint.
No owl paint.
Did the law barn have one of the trees from the sycamore tree?
I'm not that familiar with sycamore.
Okay, there is a tree from the school in Greece where Plato taught, and it's tradition that every law school has a sprout from that tree. It was taken to Italy and several hundred years later, and it's tradition that every law school has a sprout off that sycamore tree.
I see.
I just wonder if you're familiar with the tree.
I'm not familiar with that tradition or tree.
Okay. Your commencement exercise at OU was what year?
Well, it was in 1939, but I did not attend the commencement. I had a job working in Oklahoma City at the post office, and I talked my way out of commencement.
That's going to be pretty difficult.
That's a little difficult. I needed to go to a job.
Okay. What did you do for the post office?
Well, it was probably a political job. I was doing secretarial work.
What were your impressions of the war in Europe at that time, in 39, 40?
I was in seminary at that time. I'm not conversant about that.
Okay. Where is the seminary?
Seminary is located in the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary that I attended was located in Louisville, Kentucky, on Lexington Road.
When did you attend the seminary?
39 to 42.
What made you decide to go into seminary?
Well, that is a response to a call from the Lord to go into religious work. I felt called into the ministry as a senior in law school, and immediately on completing my law studies, getting my degree, I matriculated to the seminary.
You never practiced law?
No, sir.
Okay. Who was head of the seminary when you were there?
Dr. John R. Sampey.
What's the last name again?
Sampey. Sampey.
Sampey.
Yes.
Describe him.
Well, he was a high-collared gentleman from Alabama, a man who seldom arose to speak without admonishing young preachers about wine and women. But he also had a favorite character, Robert E. Lee, who was considered the greatest man in his mind since the Apostle Paul.
1942.
Pearl Harbor had been bombed on December the 7th, 41. I was not married, so on finishing school.
What were you doing on December 7th, 41?
December the 7th, 41, I was pastoring a church in central Indiana near Green Castle about 4:30 in the afternoon. I heard heard the message, drove up in front of our little country church, and there was a strange car there. Did you know that Pearl Harbor had been bombed? I was waiting for the evening service, time for it to come. There was a strange family there that was coming to the church that evening. They told me that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. I didn't have a radio in my car.
What was the reaction to the people in church that evening?
Oh, I do not recall, but I do recall that Dr. Sampy the next morning was at men's dormitory back in Louisville, Kentucky, and he said, "I want all of you gentlemen to finish your career and then go to the Army." He was a man who believed in a two-ocean navy long before America had a good two-ocean navy.
1942.
Yes.
Tell me about that year.
Well, after I had finished the seminary, I resigned from my two country churches and came back to Oklahoma and helped my father in harvest. Was awaiting my call to the service. I had volunteered. I had offered my services as a chaplain. I had 2 years as a civilian chaplain, which was necessary, the requirement for the chaplaincy. And as I was not married, I felt my place was in the Army. I got a letter from Fort Sam Houston in September of '42. Went to the county judge, and Judge B.C. Krause swore me in, and I became an officer and a gentleman by the act of Congress.
At which rank?
At first lieutenant.
First lieutenant.
I did not even know how to salute properly. I went to Lawton, was going to buy some military clothing, and they says, "Where's your PX card?" And I says, "Don't have one." They says, "You can't get in this place without a PX card." So I had to go to Oklahoma City and buy civilian military clothing at the market price, of course. I outfitted myself and proper officer equipment and walked out on the street late on Saturday afternoon, and it seemed to me that Oklahoma City was filled up with GIs saluting me, and I did not know how to salute properly. A lot of interesting things happened.
How long were you, where were you staying in Oklahoma City at that time?
Oh, my brother was a urologist in Oklahoma City, and I stayed a few days with him, but I was primarily en route to Louisville, Kentucky.
En route to Louisville?
Yes.
Back to the seminary?
Back down to the seminary. I got on the train on the 6th of September, went to Memphis, transferred to the Nashville, arrived in Louisville, Kentucky about 8 o'clock in the morning on the 7th of September, which happened to be my birthday. Asked, "How do you get to the Southern Baptist Seminary?" And they told me, "You take 2 trolley transfers and get on this thing out here in the street, and they'll take you right there." I got my 2 transfers, and I was on my way to the seminary. Came in on the back side of it. Didn't see it, the front end of it, till I'd been there several weeks. Very beautiful beech trees in the front side of it. But as I walked up the hill from the backside, I saw men mowing grass, and I did not, however, have a job. But I did have enough money to matriculate, because I had been renting some wheat land back in Oklahoma and helping my father farm that.
How long were you at the seminary?
3 years.
3 years.
39 to 42.
Okay. So after, when you left Oklahoma City as a first lieutenant, where did you go?
I went to Harvard, the chaplain's school for instruction. Lasted about 5 or 6 weeks.
Where is this located?
Located on Harvard campus at Harvard University.
Okay, Massachusetts.
Yes, Harvard, Massachusetts, Boston.
Where's the Chaplin school now? They have a, is it still there?
I do not know. It may still be on Harvard campus, but I was stayed in reserves after the war was over. Got out in January 45 and went back to the seminary. As I was not married, I did some graduate studies.
January 45?
46.
Oh, I was going to say the war.
The war was over. I got out in January. I got out in January 46.
Okay.
And went back to the seminary in the spring semester.
Tell me about going overseas.
Going overseas, I had been stationed as a chaplain with the 87th Infantry Division at Camp McCain, Mississippi, thinking that I might have to spend my entire time in Mississippi, and suddenly my orders came through to report to the port of embarkation, San Francisco. I got a detached order and reported to San Francisco, and we went out under the Golden Gate in July 1943.
Where were you headed?
No, let's see, 40. Yes, 43.
43. Where were you headed?
Australia. We had a balloon escort late in the afternoon. They said you'll have balloon escort until darkness, and then you'll be on your own. 1,400 troops on one ship.
Tell me about the trip.
Well, it was 17 days of routine riding on the high seas. But on the 16th day, we picked up an escort vessel coming into Brisbane, Australia. But we hadn't seen any vessels for 16 days.
Any threat from the Japanese during that time?
We saw no submarines. We were quite fearful, of course, and were asked to stand and watch on board in the evening, late evening.
What was life like on that ship?
Quite routine, under heavy, probably too many men on board one vessel. They were stacked in the holds 6 deep in those beds, but life wasn't too bad, really.
Did you know the situation in the Pacific? That the Japanese at that time were basically winning the war?
No, we knew that MacArthur was out there with only 2 divisions. I was with the 41st, and the 32nd was also out there. I was flown from Brisbane to Rockhampton, arrived at my station, the 41st Infantry Division, about 7 o'clock in the morning, and reported into my CO, and unfortunately he was slightly intoxicated. And I thought, this ought not to be. But fortunately, we got another colonel as our commanding officer before we went back into combat. These men had come back from New Guinea. They were in a rest area and were recuperating, in getting a little recreation.
When was the Battle of Coral Sea?
When?
Yes.
I do not know. I was not in that battle, or close to it.
Okay, had that already
That's a
occurred?
naval battle, I believe.
Right. Had that already occurred by the time you arrived?
I think not.
That's when we stopped the Japanese approached Australia.
Yeah.
In fact, that's a national holiday in Australia.
Is it?
Coral Sea Week.
I see.
I had the good fortune of being in Australia during Coral Sea Week.
Uh-huh.
And every American is treated like a king in Australia during that week.
Well, many of the Australians were, at that time, in the Middle East or elsewhere. They were out of Australia. They were extremely happy to see the 41st and the 32nd Division arrive out there, because they had had a few bombs fall in northern Queensland.
They did?
Yes, from the Japanese.
I was going to ask how much, of course the Japanese had never actually invaded, but if they ever attacked Australia itself.
I think there was no landings in Australia, but I think they did drop a few bombs. I've forgotten in what city, in the real far north part of Queensland.
What were your major duties in Australia?
I was chaplain, serving, doing the normal services week by week, chaplain visiting the troops.
Did you serve mainly as a Protestant chaplain, or did you handle all services?
We handled all services. There were not enough Catholic chaplains. We did have, I think, in that division, 1 or 2 Catholic chaplains. But occasionally we would have to have a service, a general service we would call it. And I started to have one service for the Jewish men. I put my hat on and proceeded to the service, but inasmuch as we didn't have a quorum, we did not have the service. I think you have to have, I think it was 7 or 6 or 7, whatever the number was. And we lacked 1 or 2 having enough for the service, so we did not officially meet.
The men in the 41st Division, were they combat veterans in Australia?
Yes, they were when they were a reserve division from Washington and Oregon, primarily.
Reserves or National Guard?
I mean National Guards, excuse me.
When did you get the notice that you were shipping out of Australia?
Ooh, I do not recall what time of the year it was either. We were far enough south of the equator and close enough to it that it was all summertime. Northern Queen, Rockhampton, where we were doing amphibious maneuvers over on the coast from Rockhampton. It was very much summertime.
Did you take part in the maneuvers as a chaplain?
Oh, yes.
What did you do?
Be with the troops, climbing nets, getting in barges and out of barges, and making assault landings.
Did you carry a weapon?
Yes.
Were you supposed to?
We were not supposed to, which reminds me of a good story that the chaplain had told at the chaplain school. I remember a little diminutive figure sitting at the end of the front row, and he asked the commandant of the chaplain school, he says, I understand the chaplains are not prepared to, are not allowed to carry weapons. What shall we do about that? And the commandant of the chaplain school was also a man of diminutive stature, and he stood his full 5 feet and 6 inches or whatever he was tall, and he says, dead chaplains are no asset to the United States Army. Next question, please.
When, tell me about shipping out did you go to New Guinea first?
Yes. We went to New Guinea and assault landing early in the morning. About the shipping out, I do not recall, but the first landing I recall very graphically. We had been bombing the beaches the Navy had for some hours before we landed. And we thought, well, surely there couldn't be any life on that beach after all this bombing. But when we got on the beaches, we realized that not near all men had been killed, that they were out there. And we had interrupted some Japanese personnel's breakfast. They had left their breakfast and beat a hasty retreat into the interior.
What was your feeling at that point?
My feelings were that there were lots of space out there, and it might be a long war. Some months later, I had the opportunity of buying from the Navy an air mattress. Asked the commanding officer if it would be permissible for me to add a few more pounds to my pack and carry an air mattress. And he says, Chaplain, if you can get comfortable, do so. It's liable to be a long war. Just before we were to leave to go back to New Guinea on the assault landing, the battalion CO came to me and asked me if I wanted to go to Melbourne, which was 1,000, or Sydney was that, which is approximately way, and I said, "Sir, I don't have any leave time due me this time." "I didn't ask if you had leave time due. I asked you if you'd like to see Sydney and Melbourne. We may be pushing off from here in a few weeks, and if you want to go, go." So the medical doctor and I took a few days leave and went to Sydney and Melbourne. Stayed in a men's club in Melbourne, which was an exclusive men's club where they have linen and no women. Crystal and china, the whole bit. We stayed in that fancy officers club and lived it up for a week.
When did you first see the Japanese?
Oh, a few hours after we got on the beach the first morning. They were in retreat, of course, at the moment. But in being in close pursuit, why, we began to take prisoners. And intelligence would begin to ask questions, interrogating how many troops there were.
Mm-hmm. How did we treat the prisoners?
Well, some of them were sent to back areas, and some of them were not treated so well. And after we had found some men who had been killed, slices of meat cut off of them for food, we were much less willing to take prisoners.
Were these Americans that they had?
Yes.
How much opposition did you meet when you first landed at New Guinea? Or was it just mainly a retreat by the Japanese?
It was basically a retreat. We were quite fortunate. Actually, they were in retreat at that time.
Mm-hmm. You know, I never knew the Japanese had practiced cannibalism like that.
Well, I did not see this, but we told that one prisoner had been taken that had an American GI's heart in his pocket at the time he was taken. Well, you don't take many prisoners after that for quite some time, maybe, or you're less apt to.
Mm-hmm.
War gets rugged.
Yes, it does. I spent some time in Vietnam. How long were you at New Guinea?
Oh, we were in New Guinea, between New Guinea, we made another salt landing then in the Dutch East Indies at Biak Island. I do not recall the number of weeks we were in New Guinea, maybe 4 or 5 months. Then we went to the Dutch East Indies and landed in a salt landing at Biak Island. It was there I got a shrapnel wound in my left leg one morning, about daylight, when Japanese were coming in on us, on our position for an assault attack at daybreak. And I felt the blood run down my leg. I pulled up my pant leg and the shoe was full of blood, so I realized I was going to need a little medical attention. But by the time I could walk 1.5 miles back down to the coast, why, the bleeding had stopped. And they said there's just 2 kinds of soldiers, sick soldiers and fighting soldiers, and you better have an examination and take care of this wound. So they put me on a hospital ship and went clear back to Hollandia, which was in New Guinea, Dutch New Guinea. By the time I made that trip, why, of course, the superficial wound was virtually healed up. And they said, turn into a veterans hospital if you have any trouble, and they'll take it out for you free of charge. I've had no trouble with it, still carry it. Back in the calf and leg, I guess. Probably a small flake of shrapnel. But while I was waiting for air transportation back to my unit up in the Dutch East Indies at Biak, it was at the airport, had a sudden attack of appendicitis. I'd just been released an hour earlier from the hospital. Called the doctor and he says, you better come back over here and let me examine you. So when I got back over there and he examined me, he says, you have a near to a ruptured appendix. So he operated on me, and it was a month then before I could go back to duty. I served as a temporary hospital chaplain after I got up from that surgery. I believe a man, doctor, surgeon from Michigan, operated on me out there on the open hospital tent on the side of a hill. Had my appendix out.
Where was this?
That was in Hollandia.
Tell me about conducting services, not so much in a combat situation.
Well, under combat situation, you don't take time to get out hymn books and your little organ. You have a brief service with your Bible maybe in hand, and out of the brush you will call a group of men. I was in the service one morning, and we suddenly were attacked during the service, and the men scattered, and so did the chaplain. But it's very brief service under combat circumstances.
How often would you have services?
We would try and have services for each unit at least once a week. And if you were in a rest area, you might have twice a week Bible study, extra Bible study beyond that, for those who were more seriously interested in the study.
Mm-hmm. Now again, when you were in New Guinea, was it just a general service?
I was serving basically as a Protestant chaplain. General service, yes, general Protestant service.
Okay. Were the majority of the troops Protestant?
Yes,
in that area?
In that outfit, the unit they were.
I guess being from Washington, Oregon, that would be.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. After you left the hospital, did you return to your unit?
I returned to my unit. I had heard as on getting back that our CO had been shot through the lung and that he had died, but that was not true. He had been shot through the lung riding up on top of a tank giving orders. But about 6 weeks later he returned from the hospital and took over the command of his unit. He was one fighting soldier.
Where was this?
That was in Biak Island, the Dutch East Indies.
Was there much opposition there in the East
Yes,
Indies?
they were in the hills, pretty well fortified. That was an island, not probably 40, 50 miles around it. And they were in mopping up exercises for weeks there. Some casualties.
Were you ever in direct combat?
Yes.
You ever talk about it?
Not a whole lot.
Would you talk about it now?
Well, I remember I reached over and borrowed somebody's weapon and was about to do some shooting, and somebody pulled my hand down or pulled the gun down on me and says, "Chaplain, if you're going to fire that thing, get to the edge of the perimeter. Let's not be engaging possibility of shooting our own troops." But only one time.
That was in the East Indies?
Yes.
How long were you there in the mopping up actions?
Oh, probably 6 weeks, 2 months.
How many casualties?
Not all mopping up exercises, but
How many casualties did we take in that area, in New Guinea and East Indies?
oh, I wouldn't know.
How many in your unit?
Oh, I have buried probably 15, 18 in one day.
Now, were they buried on the spot?
Yes.
So they're still buried in the East Indies?
No, they would be removed later. I've also engaged in that reburial process, but you just cover them up or make an emergency temporary grave for them. Put a dog tag on, leave something to indicate that they are there and that they will be removed later.
Mm-hmm. Where were they removed to?
They would be moved as soon as possible to a large burial grounds in that general area someplace, but I did not know where. I was with fighting troops.
Okay. said up to 15 to 18 a day? that you-
Not every day, but that, I think the day we had began our combat contact, we probably had that many or more out of our battalion.
Mhm. Were you in headquarters?
I at one time was with the headquarters of the regiment, but most of the time I was with a battalion.
Okay. Now the 41st Division, of course, there's a division chaplain.
Yes,
And then you were in which regiment?
I was in 161 and 162. I was with them different times. I was with 160. First I was with 162 and then later with 161.
How many chaplains were in those units?
There were supposed to be 16, 17 chaplains, and I was a replacement chaplain. There had been 3 killed in the first assault invasion, the combat of the 41st Division, and I was one of the 3 replacement chaplains for that division.
We got to full strength then? Chaplains?
I do not recall about that.
Okay.
Probably we were.
Were many chaplains killed in that war?
Well, one of the 3 that were in our division that were killed in the first round of combat, one died of blackwater fever, and the other 2, I think, from artillery shells or what you'd call combat casualties. Which 3 out of 16, that's a pretty high percentage.
Right. From the East Indies, where did you go?
We went to the Philippines, and we were headed for one of the islands in the Philippines when MacArthur got back to Bataan, or back to Manila rather. And we regrouped at Mindoro for an assault landing down in the southern Philippines at Zamboanga. We lost a bunch of men making that invasion that day, because they were back up in the hills, pretty well fortified and lobbing artillery rounds on our assault landing. They could zero in on us pretty well.
When you have an assault landing, what do you do?
What do I do?
You go in with the first wave, or are you held back?
I'm usually held back. Chaplains don't usually make the assault landing with the first wave. Probably, I think I went in on D-Day +1, second day.
Were you involved in any way in the rescue of the Americans, of the civilians
No,
in the Philippines?
no.
Okay, were you, now what's the name of the place that you landed in?
Zamboanga, southern, that was in, forgotten the state, but it's southernmost, almost southernmost tip of the Philippines.
Okay, is that the main island?
Yes, one of the larger islands. There's quite a
The
few.
first invasion was at Leyte, I think, by the first Cav?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay. From there, what happened?
I went to Japan.
How long were you in the Philippines?
Oh, probably 6 months. And then we were told to prepare for an assault landing in Japan. It was about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night when the word came that Japan had been bombed at Hiroshima with a new type weapon. And then after Hiroshima was bombed, 2 days later they bombed
Nagasaki.
Nagasaki, yeah. And they surrendered.
What was
So
your reaction to those bombs?
my reaction to those bombs is, thank God the war is over. We recall very well that it was not the Americans that brought about Pearl Harbor. And that's my reply then and now. After Pearl Harbor, it was time to try and get the war over with.
Were you in the Philippines then when you received word?
I was in the Philippines. Yes, we were in the Philippines having a night problem, and came into hearing all the shooting going on back at the headquarters. The rifle fire, those who were left in headquarters company were out shooting their weapons. We came in to see what was going on and found out that the war was over.
What'd you do then? When you found out the war was over, what was your reaction?
Oh, we were of course delighted that the war was over, and I was in Hiroshima just 6 weeks after they dropped the bomb.
Tell me about that.
Well, we don't want to lay many eggs like that one. There was only one building that even had a semblance of structure, apparently near the center of that thing. Pretty good sized office building, apparently. But everything that could burn or melt just about had. And steel poles for high lines or telephone lines erected in the streets got hot enough to bend over and melt. Not melt completely, but enough to make them bend over. 1800 degrees will melt a lot of things pretty fast. I brought back one souvenir from Hiroshima. Apparently the top of a gallon jug was hot enough to melt the glass and all there was of that jar. Or I assumed that it was a gallon jug. It looked like the top of it. I still have that as a souvenir.
And how many people were killed in that bomb, Hiroshima?
I think they claim approximately 70,000.
How long did you stay there in Hiroshima?
Just 6 weeks.
Was there a massive aid influx by the Americans to help Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
I couldn't answer that. I do not know. But it was pretty well cleaned up as far as all the dead, of course, were buried.
Yeah.
We didn't get there till 6 weeks after it was over. And but the devastation was so total. From a half a mile from the center of that thing, you could, as we approached the city, you could see how the devastation just went from almost massive to total devastation as you neared the center of it, with the bomb dropping, I think, 17 or 18,000 feet. The heat, concussion, and all.
What was the reaction of the Japanese? Or did you come in contact with the Japanese at Hiroshima?
We arrived there, I believe, late in the afternoon. They were quite frightened. They didn't know what to expect of us. They expected us to cut off their ears and mutilate their people, and they were frightened.
Were you the first Americans in Hiroshima?
We were not. I do not know whether we were the first Americans in Hiroshima. Probably not, but we were there just 6 weeks after the bomb was dropped. I suspect our division may have been among the earliest there. We arrived at Kure at the naval base, debarked late in the afternoon, and it was an eerie feeling watching the Japanese as they peered out from behind their shutters and curtains and drapes, watching the men move down the streets. They were afraid of us. Next day, I remember, a few days later, we tried to barter with them with some candy for some nectarines. We hadn't had any fresh fruit in a long time. And we saw them, two farmers, moving along with a couple of kettles of nectarines, and we tried to trade them candy bars for nectarines, and they just set the nectarines in the Jeep and ran. They were frightened.
How long did you get that reaction?
Not very long. They got over that real quickly.
Now, was this near Hiroshima?
Yes.
How long were you there?
I was only there a few weeks. I think about a little less than 2 months.
Of course, now you hear the reaction of, I guess, all the cancer and everything from the people that...
Well, we didn't then, of course, but we do now. Get adverse reaction. The bomb should never have been dropped, but neither should have Pearl Harbor have happened.
Well, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the reaction to the radiation after the bomb was dropped.
Oh, I wasn't there long enough. We didn't come in contact with too much of that. They were doing their utmost. I remember my Chaplin's assistant, a man that played the piano, happened to be a graduate of Juilliard Conservatory. And he had just graduated from college. He had seen no combat. I met him on board ship and asked him if he'd like to become a chaplain's assistant. And he wanted to know what the duties were. And I said, well, primarily to assist the chaplain in writing up reports and playing the piano or playing the organ for the religious services and assisting in any way that we could. He said, I'll be delighted to do it. And quick as we arrived in Korea, he said, how about our getting a piano? So we went down to the city fathers and asked if we could have a piano, and they said, sure, you can have anything that we can get for you. And they went to the leading municipal building and gave us a, I believe it was a Kawasaki grand piano. We loaded it on the 6x and took it out to the chapel. And Robert Howard, who was an excellent concert pianist almost himself, he was new in service, and I left him in Japan with the grand piano.
That was your assistant?
Yes. He later became professor of music in Oregon, I believe. I haven't heard from him in many years.
When did you come back to the States?
I got back to the States by New Year's, 1946.
I was going to ask about, were you back to the normal schedule then after the war was over in Japan? Just services once a week?
Oh, yes. These units were scattered out. You wouldn't have all the men together. It'd be a few men in this unit here and a few men in the next little town down the road someplace. And I had several services a week, but not probably more than one service for each unit.
1946.
1946.
You came back. What did you do?
I returned to the seminary after...
In Louisville?
At Louisville, Kentucky. I was still not married, and so being away from studies for several years, from 42 to 46, I was ready to do a little graduate study in graduate theology. I worked off, took a course in sociology, and the professor said, if you like sociology that well, why don't you transfer your credits to the University of Lexington? So, the University of Kentucky at Lexington, I transferred my credits over there and worked off my resident hours for a master's in sociology while pastoring a church in Kentucky.
In Louisville?
No, it was out at Salvisa, Kentucky, in near Harrodsburg, which is the oldest town in Kentucky.
After your master's, what did you do?
I pastored there in Mercer County in Kentucky for 5 years, and was accepted an invitation to a pastorate in Connorsville, Indiana, and I'd been there 11 months when, lo and behold, you guessed it, Korea. And so I was requested to return to Fort Benjamin Harrison in 10 days for duty. I got a 20-day extension, and after 30 days I was back in the Army as a reserve chaplain.
Which unit this time?
I was sent to chaplain school again. Learn how to salute.
Harvard?
Yes.
Did you go to Korea?
No, fortunately, I think, I do not know, but on my 201 file, I had that Asiatic tour of duty, Japan. For some reason, I was sent to Frankfurt, Germany as a hospital replacement chaplain. And the man there outranked me. He was major, and I was just a humble captain. And the CO, the medical CO of the hospital says, well, we can't have chaplains sitting around here doing nothing. He didn't want to take air transportation home. He wanted to come back by slow boat through China or someplace. And so the European theater chaplain called me in and said, how would you like to be chaplain for the State Department? I said, sounds like a winner. So I was chaplain for the State Department at Bonn. I had a German chauffeur, a Mercedes limousine, or car rather. And all the time I was there, I lived in Frankfurt and served as chaplain down in Bonn, Highcog.
What were your duties as State Department chaplain?
Oh, primarily to have a service on a Sunday morning.
For who?
For the Highcog officials at the State Department at Bonn.
Now, you say State Department, you mean the civilian government?
Yes.
Are these the German government or the American occupation forces?
American occupation forces.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't be speaking to German people. I do well to negotiate English.
Mm-hmm. How long did you serve as State Department chaplain?
I was there 6 months.
6 months. Then what did you do?
I returned to the United States and said, let me sign that last piece of paper which says O-U-T, out.
And when was that? What was that?
Let's see. Good grief, I don't remember. 5 years, and 16 months, 7 years after 46, it would be 50, must have been about 53.
53, yeah.
Yeah. I returned and took pastorate at Ada, Oklahoma. Trinity Baptist Church in Ada, Oklahoma.
You know Robert S. Kerr?
Yes, I knew him only as the governor of the state. He was born at Ada.
Mm-hmm.
His log house still stands, I think, there.
How long were you in Ada?
5 years, 5.5 years.
When did you return to Buffalo?
After being at Ada, I moved to Casper, Wyoming, First Southern Baptist Church at Casper, Wyoming, and was there almost 6 years. And after that, I moved to Kingfisher, Oklahoma, and was there 8.5 years. Following that, I went to Iowa for 5.5 years. To Des Moines, not to Des Moines, but to, after finishing there, I went overseas again.
Where to?
I had been, I met the Theater of Operations Secretary of our denomination. I saw him at the Southern Baptist Convention and asked him if he had any civilian pastorates open. He said there was one at Madrid until 2 weeks ago that it's been taken. But there are 2 in Arabia, one in Taif at the capital of Saudi and one down at the seaport town of Dubai in United Arab Emirates. Which one would you like to go to? One has people and the other has status up in the mountains or up in the high areas in Taif. I says, I'll go where the people are, and I'm glad I chose that because it was much more individual liberty and opportunity to witness to American, British personnel and Indian personnel and Filipinos and Pakistanis and Afghanis.
How long were you in the Arab Emirates?
I was only over there, approximately 2 years. So, to answer your question, when I got out, I got came back and returned to Oklahoma. That was in 1979.
What do you do now? You have a church now?
I am a retired Baptist minister. I do supply work and live on my farm, which I inherited from my parents. Part of it I bought since well, not since I retired, but I bought it. Part of the land I have is what I acquired.
Well, I think we have a good interview.
Well, thank you. I have been extremely fortunate as an individual to be allowed to come back to my home community and live in the house in which I was born. It's not the best of a house, but at least it's paid for. Baptist clergymen don't always have a whole lot to retire to if they live in furnished parsonages.
That's true.
And that's a thing that we have sorely neglected in our denomination. We're trying to do something about it, but not too much has been done yet.
Okay, thank you.